Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's really sensitive and often tough to talk about,
Yeah.
miscarriage.
It's a difficult one for sure.
And we really want to get into all the facts, not
Yeah.
just the medical stuff, but the political side of things too.
Yeah.
You know, it's a topic that's become pretty charged lately.
Absolutely. It's definitely in the political sphere.
So to make sure we're covering all the bases, we've got some great sources lined up. We've got medical info from the Mayo Clinic, which is always super reliable.
Yeah, a great source for medical information.
Then we'll be checking some political claims using fact-checking from Al Jazeera.
Important to separate fact from fiction there.
Exactly. And finally, we'll be looking at some legal analysis from CNN to give us the full picture.
So medical, political, legal. Wow, we're covering it all today.
Yeah, we're going deep. So our mission today is to help you understand both the medical realities of miscarriage and how this topic is being used, and sometimes maybe even distorted in the political arena.
Yeah, it's about seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a miscarriage?
Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, it's defined as the loss of a pregnancy before the 20th week.
Okay, so before that 20-week mark.
Right, and it's actually much more common than many people realize. About 10 to 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage.
Wow. That's a pretty significant number.
It is. And the actual number is likely even higher because many miscarriages happen very early on, even before a woman knows she's pregnant.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to address something right away.
Yeah.
You know, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
There's so much guilt and self-blame that people feel when this happens.
Absolutely. It's a really heavy emotional burden.
It is. And the Mayo Clinic makes it clear most of the time miscarriage is not caused by something the pregnant person did.
Right. It's not about blame.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So then what is the main cause?
Well, the most common cause is actually something called chromosomal abnormalities in the developing baby.
Chromosomal abnormalities. What does that even mean?
Think of chromosomes like a set of blueprints for how a person develops.
Oh, okay. So like the instruction.
Exactly. If those blueprints have errors, the pregnancy might not be viable.
I see. So it's like a problem with the instructions themselves.
Exactly.
And the Mayo Clinic says that these chromosomal issues are the reason for the majority of miscarriages.
Yeah. They account for about half to 2/3 of miscarriages that happen in the first trimester.
Wow. So it's a really common factor.
It is. And they actually describe 3 main types of chromosomal issues that can lead to miscarriage.
Oh, interesting. What are those?
Well, there's an embryonic pregnancy, which is where the embryo doesn't form properly.
Okay.
Then there's intrauterine fetal demise, where the embryo forms but it stops developing and dies.
Oh, wow.
And then there's molar pregnancies, which are kind of unique.
How so?
Well, in a molar pregnancy, the placenta develops abnormally, and it can really sometimes even become cancerous.
Oh, wow. So that's why those pregnancies can't continue.
Exactly.
So to kind of sum it up for our listeners here, while miscarriage is obviously a really difficult experience, most of the time, it's due to these random events that happen very early in development.
Right.
And it's not something anyone caused or could have prevented.
It's a natural part of biology, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now let's talk about some of the misconceptions around miscarriage, because there are a lot of them.
Yeah, so many myths and old wives' tales.
Exactly. And the Mayo Clinic actually has a helpful list of activities that they say do not cause miscarriage.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Like exercise.
Oh, really? So working out is okay?
According to the Mayo Clinic, yeah, sex is also fine.
Interesting.
Arguments, too.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people worry about getting upset.
Yeah, makes sense.
But the Mayo Clinic says it's not a factor. And even using birth control pills before pregnancy doesn't cause miscarriage.
Huh, I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, it's surprising, right? And even working, as long as you're not exposed to harmful substances or radiation.
So it's really about those specific kinds of risks.
Right. It's not just everyday activities.
That's reassuring for a lot of people, I think.
I think so, too. It's about separating fact from fiction and understanding that those things aren't the culprit.
Yeah.
Of course, there are certain risk factors that can increase the likelihood of miscarriage.
Right.
The Mayo Clinic lists several, and age is a significant one.
The age is a big one.
Yeah. They actually give some pretty specific stats, too.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, at age 35, the risk of miscarriage is about 20%.
Okay.
At 40, it goes up to about a third.
Oh.
And by 45, it's over 50%.
So the risk really increases as you get older.
Yeah, those are some pretty sobering statistics.
They are. It's important information to have, though.
Absolutely. And it's not just age. The Mayo Clinic mentions other factors like having a previous miscarriage,
Okay.
certain health conditions, problems with the uterus, or cervix lifestyle factors like smoking and alcohol.
Yeah, those make sense.
Your weight can even play a role,
Interesting.
and even certain genetic conditions.
Right, so there's a whole range of factors.
Yeah. And they even talk about something called translocation.
Translocation, what's that?
They describe it as a healthy parent having like shuffled pages in their instruction manual.
Oh, I see.
So it doesn't affect them,
Right.
but it can cause problems if their child inherits those shuffled pages.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to explain a complex genetic thing.
It is. It's a good analogy.
Hmm.
And it really shows that while most miscarriages are due to those random chromosome issues we were talking about,
Yeah.
there are other factors that can increase the risk.
It's a complex picture.
Definitely. Now, we've talked about what causes miscarriage, but what about potential complications that can come up?
Right, because there are some serious things to watch out for.
Exactly. The Mayo Clinic highlights septic miscarriage and hemorrhage.
Oh, yeah. Those are serious.
Septic miscarriage is basically a uterine infection,
Right, a serious infection.
and hemorrhage is heavy bleeding.
Both of those require immediate medical attention.
Absolutely. And the Mayo Clinic actually lists the symptoms of each.
Which is super important for anyone who might be experiencing these complications.
Yeah, it's vital information.
So we've covered a lot of ground on the medical side.
We have.
But as we said at the beginning, miscarriage isn't just a medical issue.
Right. Unfortunately, it's become this political battleground.
Yeah, with both sides using it to push their agendas.
So to really understand that side of it, we need to see how it's being talked about and debated in the political world.
Right. We need to look at how these facts are being used and maybe even spun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because once you have the science down, you're better equipped to see through any kind of spin and form your own informed opinions.
Exactly. It's about being an informed citizen.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and look at how miscarriage is playing out in politics.
Sounds good.
And we can start with a statement made by Kamala Harris about Donald Trump and pregnancy monitoring.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It was. She claimed that a Trump administration would lead to, like, government overreach in pregnancy monitoring. And she specifically referenced something called Project 2025.
Project 2025. I've heard that thrown around, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah. It's been causing a lot of concern about the government getting too involved in personal health care decisions.
Right. That's a scary thought.
It is. So our source from Al Jazeera explains that Project 2025 is a policy blueprint created by some of Trump's supporters.
Okay.
But it's not like an official campaign document or anything.
So it's more like a suggestion or a proposal?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And importantly, it doesn't actually propose monitoring all pregnancies.
Oh, so it's more specific than that.
Yeah, it calls for more comprehensive monitoring of pregnancies that end in fetal death.
So that includes miscarriages?
Yes, it includes miscarriages, stillbirths, and abortions.
So they're lumping all of those together?
They are. The goal, according to Project 2025, is to gather more data on these outcomes.
Data collection can be a tricky thing.
It can. Al Jazeera lists the specific data points they want states to collect, like the number of fetal deaths, the stage of pregnancy, the cause of death where the woman lives,
Okay.
and if an abortion was performed, the method used.
So they're getting pretty detailed.
Yeah, and they argue that this data collection is necessary to better understand the causes of fetal death and work towards preventing them.
I can see the argument for that, but it also raises some red flags for me.
Like what?
Well, collecting that much data, especially in the context of the abortion debate, it raises some serious privacy concerns.
Yeah, for sure. People are understandably worried about how that data might be used.
Especially in a climate where reproductive rights are increasingly under threat.
Right, it's a very sensitive issue.
It is. And it's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides, you know?
In what way?
Well, on one hand, you have the potential for really valuable research that could maybe even help prevent future losses.
Yeah, I can see that.
But on the other hand, there's the potential for that data to be misused.
Right, and that could lead to further restrictions on reproductive freedom.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
It is. So this brings us to Trump's stance on abortion.
Yeah, and how much the federal government should be involved in all of this.
Right. Our source from CNN really dives into that.
And I'm guessing it's not as straightforward as it might seem.
You guessed it. Trump has repeatedly said he wants to leave abortion decisions up to individual states.
Right. States' rights.
But when you look at his actions and the legal battles being fought, it's clearly more complicated than that.
Yeah, I was going to say actions speak louder than words.
They do. CNN points to the ongoing legal fights over regulations for mifepristone, the abortion pill.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. This case is huge because it directly impacts access to medication abortion.
Which is how many people choose to have an abortion.
Exactly. One side is pushing for way stricter regulations,
Okay.
while the other side says that the current rules are safe and effective.
So it's a battle over access, basically.
It is. And now the incoming Trump administration has to decide whether to keep defending the existing FDA regulations in court.
Or side with those who want to restrict access.
Right. That decision is going to have massive implications for access across the country. And CNN also talks about some other legal challenges to policies from the Biden era that were aimed at protecting abortion access.
Ah, so those are probably on the chopping block.
Most likely. The Trump administration could try to reverse those protections through regulatory changes.
So even if Trump sticks to his word about letting states decide,
Right.
his administration's actions are still going to shape the landscape of reproductive rights.
Absolutely. It's a really complicated situation.
It is. It seems like his campaign promises might actually clash with the demands of some of his most hardcore supporters on this issue.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Definitely. It's a reminder that the personal experience of miscarriage, this very intimate thing,
Yeah.
it's often intertwined with these bigger political and legal battles that are happening.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive even deeper into those legal challenges and how they could impact people's lives in our next segment, so stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into this really complicated world of miscarriage. We've seen how this deeply personal experience is increasingly tied to political and legal battles.
It can feel overwhelming to think about, for sure.
Yeah, it can. But having a solid understanding of the medical stuff that we talked about in the last segment, the actual science.
Yeah, having those facts.
It really helps us navigate this landscape.
Absolutely. It helps us see through the noise and the rhetoric and make informed decisions.
Exactly. So building on what we discussed about that potential shift in the political climate, let's actually dig deeper into some of those legal challenges that CNN was highlighting, because they could really reshape the landscape of abortion access.
Yeah, absolutely. And by extension, how miscarriage is handled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one case that really stands out is this fight over emergency abortion care.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. It gets to the heart of what happens when a pregnant person's health is at risk.
Right. It's a life or death situation in some cases.
It really can be.
Yeah.
And it seems like a no-brainer to me. If someone's life is in danger, they should get the care they need.
Right.
Regardless of where they live or what the state laws say.
You would think so, but it's become a major point of contention, unfortunately.
I know. It's crazy. So the Biden administration was arguing that federal law actually requires hospitals to provide abortions in emergencies.
Okay.
Even in states where abortion is banned.
Oh, wow.
If the pregnant person's life or health is in danger.
So it's like a federal protection.
Right. But now that's being challenged in court.
Of course it is.
And with this new Trump administration, it's really hard to say how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, it's a big question mark.
It is. It's a very real concern. Imagine a woman who's experiencing an ectopic pregnancy.
Oh, yeah, that's incredibly dangerous.
It is. It's life-threatening.
The fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, right?
Yeah, and it can't survive there.
And if it ruptures, it's a medical emergency.
Exactly. And in some states, abortion is already banned.
Yeah.
So if the Trump administration sides against the Biden administration's stance on this,
it could have dire consequences.
It really could. It's a scary thought that a woman's life could be at risk because of political maneuvering.
Yeah, it's putting politics above people's health.
It is. And it highlights how these legal battles have real-life consequences.
Right. They're not just theoretical.
No. They're about people's lives.
Mm.
And the decisions made by this incoming administration are going to directly impact those lives.
Absolutely. It's high stakes.
It is. Another area where we might see some pretty significant changes are those Biden-era regulations that required employers to offer time off.
Okay.
For employees who have to travel for abortion care.
Oh, right.
It seems pretty likely those are going to be targeted under this new administration.
Yeah, I'd say that's a safe bet. Those regulations were a big step towards ensuring access for people who live in those states where abortion is restricted or banned.
Right.
But they've faced a ton of opposition from anti-abortion groups.
Yeah, and the Trump administration is probably going to try to roll them back.
Probably. It's frustrating to see progress being undone like that.
It is.
Yeah.
Especially considering those regulations weren't even about, mandating abortion.
Right. It was about accommodating people's healthcare needs.
Exactly. Whatever those needs might be.
It's a prime example of how the conversation gets distorted. It wasn't about forcing anyone to have an abortion. It was about recognizing that people sometimes need time off to get the healthcare they need.
And taking those protections away, it just places an even greater burden on those who are already facing so many obstacles.
Absolutely. It creates a system where your zip code and your income can dictate whether or not you can actually access the care you need.
That's not fair.
It's not. It's a real step back in terms of reproductive justice.
Yeah. And another thing that CNN pointed out was this expansion of patient privacy rules
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
that were designed to protect information about reproductive health care.
Right, so sensitive information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those seem pretty vulnerable under the new administration, too.
Yeah, that's worrying. Those privacy protections are so important, especially now when seeking abortion care or even information about abortion could put people at risk in certain states.
It's a whole new world post-Roe.
It is. And in that landscape where we have states with these really severe penalties for abortion, protecting that information is crucial.
I agree. The potential for it to be misused is just huge.
It is. And without those safeguards, people might hesitate to seek the care they need.
Right, or even be honest with their healthcare providers.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They might be afraid of legal repercussions.
It just creates this environment of fear and distrust.
Yeah, which is the last thing anyone needs when they're seeking medical care.
It undermines the whole patient-doctor relationship.
Absolutely. When people can't be honest with their doctors, it makes it so much harder to provide effective care.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here on the legal and political front.
Yeah, we have.
But let's shift back to the individual experience of miscarriage for a minute.
Okay.
Because you mentioned earlier how important it is to keep those personal stories front and center.
It's crucial. We can't lose sight of the fact that behind all these statistics and policy debates are real people
Right.
who are grappling with the emotional and physical toll of miscarriage.
It's such a personal and often isolating experience.
It is. And even though the Mayo Clinic emphasizes that in most cases, miscarriage is not anyone's fault,
Right.
I don't think that necessarily lessens the grief and the sense of loss.
No, not at all. It's a complex grief process.
It is. And it's so common to feel shame and guilt and to blame yourself, even if you logically understand that it was most likely just this random biological event.
Right. And it just breaks my heart to think about going through that, especially in a political climate where reproductive health care is under attack.
Yeah, you're right. It creates this extra layer of vulnerability and fear,
Yeah.
and it can make it even harder to reach out for support and to start healing.
It's like adding insult to injury. You know?
It really is. You're dealing with this profound loss, and you're also worried about the political implications and the potential for judgment or even legal scrutiny.
Exactly. It's just
Yeah.
an incredibly difficult position to be in.
It is. And it really highlights the need for more empathy and understanding surrounding miscarriage,
Yes.
both from those around us and within the broader societal conversation. We need to create a space where people feel safe to share their experiences, to grieve openly, and to seek support without fear of judgment.
And that includes pushing back against the politicization of miscarriage. We need to separate those personal experiences from the political agendas
Yes, absolutely.
and recognize that every miscarriage is a unique and deeply felt loss.
It's about centering compassion and understanding rather than using these personal tragedies to score political points.
Yes.
It's about respecting individual stories and supporting those who are hurting regardless of their political beliefs or the circumstances of their loss.
I think that's such an important point to emphasize. It is. And it brings us back to the bigger picture. You know, what does all of this mean for the future of reproductive health care in this country?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The landscape is constantly shifting, and the future is uncertain, to say the least.
Yeah, no kidding. But we can't give in to despair or throw our hands up in defeat.
No, absolutely not. We have to figure out a way forward.
We do. So what do you see as like the most important steps we can take to create a better future for those experiencing miscarriage and facing these challenges?
Well, I think a big part of the solution lies in continuing to have these tough conversations.
Yeah.
We need to keep educating ourselves and each other about the facts, dispelling those myths, and calling out harmful rhetoric when we see it.
It's about being advocates for evidence-based policies and compassionate care.
Exactly. And making sure that the voices of those who are actually impacted by miscarriage are heard loud and clear.
Those voices need to be at the forefront.
They do. This is about people's lives, their health, their families, their futures. We can't afford to stay silent when policies are threatening their fundamental rights and freedoms.
It's a call to action for all of us.
Yeah.
We can't be passive bystanders in this fight.
Right. We all have a role to play.
We do. Now, we've talked a lot about the systemic issues,
Yeah.
but I'm also wondering what individuals can do to make a difference, like in their own communities.
Yeah, that's a great point.
How can we be better allies to those who are going through this difficult experience?
That's a great question, and it's one that deserves its own in-depth discussion. So stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore ways to offer support, to create more empathetic spaces, and to advocate for meaningful change.
Welcome back to our deep dive on miscarriage. We've covered so much ground in this episode.
We have, from the science to the politics, it's been heavy but important.
It really has. I think it's been crucial to explore these complexities.
Yeah, to see how they actually impact people's lives.
Exactly. And, despite all the challenges, I still feel hopeful that we can create a more supportive and informed environment.
I agree. I am too. It starts with changing the narrative.
Right. We have to break the silence.
Yeah, for sure.
Challenge the stigma. Encourage open and honest conversations about pregnancy loss.
Exactly. It's about creating that space, where people feel safe to share their stories.
And grieve without shame.
Yeah, and where they can seek support without worrying about being judged.
It's about building community and understanding so people don't feel so alone.
Absolutely. And it's also about recognizing that everyone's experience with miscarriage is different.
Right. Everyone grieves in their own way.
Exactly. And not everyone has the same beliefs about pregnancy and loss.
It's a very personal thing.
It is. We have to respect those differences and approach these conversations with sensitivity.
Yeah, with empathy.
It's about recognizing that there's no right way to grieve.
And that everyone deserves support.
Exactly, no matter what their beliefs are or how they cope.
And we also need to recognize the role of healthcare providers in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Doctors, nurses, all healthcare professionals.
They need to be equipped to provide really compassionate and informed care.
Yeah, it's not just about understanding the medical side of things.
Right. It's also about being sensitive to the emotional and psychological impact.
That's so important. It's about treating the whole person.
Right. Not just their physical condition.
And we need to push for better resources and support systems, too.
Like counseling and support groups.
Exactly. All the things that can help people navigate the grief and trauma of pregnancy loss.
It's about building a whole network of care.
Yes, one that goes beyond just the hospital or the doctor's office.
That extends into the community.
Exactly. We need to make sure people can access those resources and that they know where to turn for help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, the changes that need to happen on a societal level.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, what can individuals do to make a difference? Like, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be a better ally to those experiencing miscarriage?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think the most important thing is to just listen, be there for the person who's hurting, offer a listening ear.
Just be present.
Yeah, and validate their feelings. Don't try to downplay their loss or offer unsolicited advice.
Right, just be there for them.
Exactly, without judgment or expectations.
And be really mindful of the language you use, too.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Avoid those phrases that might unintentionally diminish their experience.
Things like, at least you know you can get pregnant, or it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, those kinds of statements, even if they're well-intentioned.
Right, they can feel so dismissive and hurtful.
They can. Instead, focus on expressing empathy and understanding.
Yeah, just simple things like, I'm so sorry for your loss, or I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you.
Those go a long way.
They do. And small gestures of kindness can be really powerful, too. Offer to bring them meals or help with childcare or run errands.
Yeah, just take some of the burden off their shoulders.
Right. It's all about showing up for them in practical ways during a tough time.
Those everyday acts of service can mean so much.
They really can. And don't be afraid to talk about miscarriage. The more we have these conversations, the less stigma there will be.
Yeah, we have to normalize these conversations.
Exactly. So people feel comfortable talking about it and seeking support.
And remember, healing takes time.
It does. Be patient and understand.
And keep offering support long after that initial loss.
Right. It's about being that constant source of comfort and compassion.
Even when it feels like the rest of the world has moved on.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that those political and legal battles we talked about, they're going to continue to shape the experience of miscarriage for so many people.
So we can't just focus on individual acts of kindness.
Right.
We also have to engage in that broader fight for reproductive justice.
We do. We need to advocate for policies that protect access to health care.
To comprehensive reproductive health care.
Including abortion care. Absolutely. And we need to support the organizations that are working towards these goals.
It's about creating a society where everyone has the right to make decisions about their own bodies.
Yes.
About their own reproductive health.
Without shame, stigma, or political interference.
That's the ultimate goal.
It is. And it might be a long road.
It might be.
But I believe that if we work together, we can create a more just and compassionate world for everyone.
Well said. I think we've really covered a lot of important ground in this deep dive.
We have. It's a complex issue, but I hope this has helped our listeners understand it a little better.
I hope so, too. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We encourage you to keep learning and exploring these issues
Yeah, keep having those conversations.
and support those who are struggling.
And remember, you're not alone. There are resources available, and there are people who care. Reach out, seek support, and know that healing is possible.
Absolutely. Until next time,
Mhm.
stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.